Hey everybody, it's Mark. On February 11th, 2021, we did a webinar called Arcade's Fire inside Esri scripting language. And the goal of that webinar was to introduce many of you to the Arcade scripting language that exists within ArcGIS. And we had packed a lot of information in that 60 minutes, and we sped through the demos just to make sure that we got all that content in. But I know a lot of you, especially those who are new to Arcade, really want to understand what they're programming. So that's what the purpose of this video is. I'm going to do the labeling profile demo again, and this time I'm going to slow jam it. I'm going to go through each line of code in a little more detail, providing you some background of what's going on, some context. I'm going to throw out some lingo, some syntax, so you get a better understanding of where to begin with your Arcade expressions. So with that in mind, let's get going. Okay, so here's a scenario. I'm using the new map viewer here in ArcGIS Online. This will become the default viewer when April rolls around, but right now it is in beta. But that's okay. I'm going to be using this new map viewer for a specific reason, and I'll talk about that later. Now, in terms of data, we're looking at some weather stations that have been posted as a feature layer in the Living Atlas of the world. And I'm just going to do a quick little pop-up to be able to see the information here. So we got temperature, we got current conditions, we have some information on when it was updated, etc. So you can take a look and see just sort of the basics of what's going on here. And of course, we also have the location of this particular station. Now, to be able to turn on labels in the new map viewer, it's pretty simple. You just go here to labels on your highlighted layer. You can enable those labels, and then you'll be able to pick a field to be able to label by. So let's do it by the temperature. So we'll be able to see the temperature in degrees. And those will now display next to each of those stations. Okay, so that's sort of the very basics of how to be able to add in a simple label by an individual field. Now, how can we take advantage of the labeling profile of Arcade within this to be able to fancy up our labels? Well, you'll notice on the right-hand side of the field name, there's a little button there that will allow you to open up the Arcade editor. So remember, the Arcade editor is always somewhere nearby what you want to be working with. So in this case, since I'm working with labels, it's right next to the label button. And from here, I'll be able to do labeling things. Now, as you'll see, currently the expression is that temperature field that it's getting from the feature. And under globals, you'll be able to see a list of all of the fields that are in the current database. And again, this is data that I'm using from the Living Atlas. This is not my own data that I own. So that's one of the huge benefits of Arcade is that you can utilize data from different sources, even if you don't own it. So that's pretty huge. So all of the fields are listed here, and we'll take advantage of some of these different fields in a bit. But for me, I want to do something a little bit fancier. So I want to be able to add the degree sign to the temperature. And maybe I want to alter that temperature to be able to have no decimal points. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to do something called concatenation. It's a fancy word for adding strings together. And in Arcade, you can add strings together with just a simple plus sign. So I'm going to do a plus sign here, and then I'm going to paste the little degree symbol so we'll be able to see it here, and we'll close it with a single quote. Now in Arcade, you can use strings between single quotes or between double quotes. It doesn't really matter. It's pretty flexible. So there's a good example of being able to concatenate. Now, Arcade is smart. It knows that this particular field is a number, but in concatenation, you should normally add strings with strings. Now, Arcade will figure out that this is really meant to be a string and will add to two strings anyway. But in proper programming languages, you'll need to do something called casting. Well, you'll need to convert that number into a string for it to be able to concatenate properly. So there is a function called text to be able to allow us to do that. Now, functions always begin with an open parentheses, close with a closed parentheses. Now, we can learn more about different functions as we see here. We go into the function section, and maybe I want to find that text function. And the reason why you might want to find it this way is you can get to the help. So this will give you some information about what arguments are required for this function to work. So the first thing you'll notice that it has two arguments. You need a value, and then you need a format. And then it's going to return some text. Remember, all functions return something. So it's a good idea to understand when you're using a function what gets returned to you. In this case, this is exactly what I want. I want text, and I'm going to add it with my second text to do that proper concatenation. Now let's talk about this format argument. And you see here the format argument allows you to be able to manipulate that text on the fly. Okay, so we're not editing the source data. We're actually going to modify the text on the fly based on some kind of condition. And that condition, if you're working with dates, can be able to see how you format that date or format the time. In our case, I'm interested in the digit here. And this is going to allow me to be able to omit leading or trailing zeros. So in our case, I'm going to add in that second argument. The first argument's already there. That's going to be the value. It's going to be the value of that temperature field. And then I'm going to add a second argument to be able to get rid of that decimal point. Okay, so there we go. So basically, it's going to remove all of the numbers on the right-hand side and keep all the numbers on the left-hand side. Now, of course, you want to be able to test your expression. So there's a test button up here. And it's going to generate a value that kind of looks the way we want it to look. Okay, so we could always test to see that this is the values that we want. It looks like it's okay. So now you'll see that our labels are now reflecting what we are seeing. Okay, with the degree sign and the number. And it's listed as a custom field here under the field properties. All right, so just like that, with just a simple arcade expression, you can take something that already exists and you can massage it to make it look exactly the way you want. Now, the rest of these examples I'm not going to type. I'm just going to show you the result, but I'll walk you through each of those lines one by one. So let's talk about this second expression that I built to be able to incorporate two different fields together. So in this case, we're going to take that same expression that we had in our first example, and we're going to concatenate it with two other text objects. The first is going to be the title. Okay, so it's going to go into that title field, which is the name of the station, and it's going to plunk it at the beginning of my string. Now this second string, again, will allow me to be able to kind of do some cosmetic things. If I didn't have that open and closed double quotes with a space in between, it's going to scrunch those two field values together. But when I do add in that space, it's going to add in that space buffer in between, so you'll be able to distinguish between the station name and the temperature. And as you can see from the result, that space gets added between the name of the station and our temperature reading. So again, we could take a look and see what that looks like. And we can now have the name of the station and the temperature. All right, let's take this up another level. What if I want to be able to have a multi-label on, or a multi, let me rephrase this again. What if you want to be able to have a label on multiple lines? Okay, so how do you do that? Well, again, let's take a look at the expression and see how I built it. Now, we have the same text at the beginning. That's the station name. We have the same text that we have at the end. That's the temperature. But instead of that space, we're adding in a constant called TextFormatting.New Line. Now, these constants exist. They're listed under here under constants. And these are for things that, for special cases. So for example, we have a number of these text formatting ones. If you really want to have a double quote in your string, or you really want to have the forward slashes or the backslashes in your string, then there are specific constants for that. But in our case, I'm going to take advantage of that new line, which is going to insert a brand new line in between our two string objects. Do the test again, and now you'll see exactly what that looks like, where we have the name of the station on top and the temperature on the bottom. And again, we could take a look and see what that looks like here. Now, this is really important. Multi-lined labels are only supported in applications that are built on the ArcGIS API for JavaScript 4.x, basically the next generation of the JavaScript API. So this is where we can use the new map viewer or ArcGIS Pro or maybe field maps to be able to view these multi-lined labels. What you can't use is the map viewer classic, sort of the original map viewer that was built, because that was not built on the JavaScript API 4.0. So that's why I'm using the new map viewer in this case, because we can view multi-line labels. If I were to do this in the old map viewer classic, the text would not be in multiple lines. The code won't break, but it won't display the way we want it to. So that's why I'm using the new map viewer in this case. All right, let's take it up another level. You may have noticed, actually, let's go back here, that the station names are in all uppercase, and that's, kind of hard on the eyes for me. Maybe I want to be able to soften that a little bit. So I'm going to take those hard uppercase labels, and I'm going to manipulate those to be able to have it in mixed case. And again, this comes down to a simple function. So instead of just having the title, the name of the station, I'm going to wrap it around this proper function. So the proper function is basically going to take whatever that string is, and it's going to put it in proper case. So every new word in that string will get a capital letter. So we do a test. I don't think the test is going to help us show that here, since the word is only, well, it does, because it does convert all of those uppercases into lower cases. So let's take a look and see how that appears. That's a little bit more pleasing to the eye. So we can now see that all of those labels now are in mixed case. Now there's some weird things going on here. So you can see here there's Baie-Comeau, Montjoly. The uppercase didn't quite work there. So I'm going to have to fix that. I'll fix that a little bit later. All right, so now I'm going to take this and we're going to do one more line in our label. So we're going to make it a 3-lined label, because I want to incorporate some of those current conditions, whether it's sunny or rainy or snowing. Right? I want to be able to have that in there. So in order to do that, I'm going to take advantage of a function that's actually built for concatenation. It's actually called a concatenate function. So this function will allow me to be able to add a series of texts together and put some kind of character in between each of those. So in our case, I'm going to take the proper, which is the thing that we saw before, and I'm going to take the temperature, again, that's the thing that we saw before, and I'm going to add a third field to it for those current conditions. And I'm going to place those all into a thing called an array. So an array object with those square brackets indicate that you can put in a collection of objects. Okay, so in this case, that concatenate first argument, it requires an array of objects that you want to add together. So in our case, we've got object 1, we've got object 2, we've got object 3, separated by commas, and those will be our 3 arguments that we're going to add together. Now the second argument of concatenate is what character is going to go in between each of those 3 strings. And in our case, we're going to use that new line constant that we saw earlier. So it's going to put the first item, new line, second item, new line, third item, new line. And again, let's do a quick test to be able to see that it works. Okay, so there we go. We have our 3-line label with those observations. All right, so let's take a look at the final result. And we'll be able to see that we have our new multi-line label. Now, some of these are good, right? We've got light snow, drifting snow in the Maritimes at this moment. But some of these are kind of ugly. There's a lot of not observed here. And I don't want to have that clutter the screen. So I'm going to take those out. And I will do that by adding a little bit of logic into our expression. So you notice here the concatenate's pretty well the same, but I'm going to do a bit of a test here before. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new variable. And that new variable can be declared with that var statement. So var will allow you to be able to declare a brand new variable. And that variable is going to store something. What is it going to store? Well, it's going to store the results of an if function. So what is an if? An if is just like an if statement and allows you to be able to deal with things when you hit a fork in the road. Do I go in direction 1 or do I go in direction 2? In other words, if something is true, I'm going to go one way. If something is false, I'm going to go the other way. So that's what we're going to do with an if statement. We're going to do a test. And that test is going to allow us to see if that value in that current conditions field is equal to not observed. What it does is it goes and it does find this particular string, and it's going to return a number. The find function returns a number. If it finds not observed, it's going to give us the position of the string where that not observed occurs. Okay? So in this case, if it's not observed, it's going to return a 0 if it actually finds it within that current condition. So if it doesn't find it, then it returns a -1. So that's why we have this find function with some conditional statement to test if not observed, if the find returns a -1 or anything greater than -1. If it finds a value greater than -1, then the value returns a true. And in that case, it will return the first argument into this variable. So if it finds not observed, it's going to return -1 from the find, and it will return the true statement, which is a null. If it doesn't find new observed, then it's going to return the third argument. In this case, what will happen if a false is returned? So if it doesn't find not observed, okay, in other words, it turns out to be -1, then use the actual field value. So that's that fork in the road, right? Return a null or return the actual field value. And whatever this variable returns, we'll throw it into our concatenate statement. So we'll do a test on that. In this case, alert did have not observed, but now you'll see that since it found that not observed, it's not going to put anything in that third line. So again, we'll do the test. And we'll be able to see now that those stations with a current condition, they are listed, and those that are not observed will have no string underneath the temperature at all. All right, we're getting really close to what I want. But I'm going to do some more on-the-fly calculations. And that's one of the beautiful things about Arcade is that you can perform these calculations on the fly. Now in our case, it's going to be pretty simple. We have our temperatures in Celsius. I'm just going to do something very similar for our temperatures, but in Fahrenheit. And here's where we're just going to perform some quick math on this. So we're just going to do the same calculation to be able to convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit. We're going to format that within a text function so that there's no decimal point, and then we're going to tag on that degrees Fahrenheit at the end of it. So this is, again, one of the key components of Arcade. You don't need to create a new field for these Fahrenheit values. You can calculate them on the fly as you need to. So there you go. You can now see that that is what our result's going to look like. And for overall labels, let's take a peek and be able to see that those Fahrenheit values now get listed alongside those Celsius values. All right, so this is getting really close to exactly what I want. But let's revisit what's going on in these station names. And let's also revisit something that, or visit something that we haven't seen yet. So let's say the actual temperature is minus 0.3 degrees. Well, if I use my current formula, it's going to return a -0 value, okay? Which is not what I want, right? I want to be able to show it as 0 degrees. That's just how the rounding works. So I have these two sort of weird things that I want to fix with my last bit of code in my expression. So let's do that cleanup. The first thing to fix is actually really easy, and that's the temperature. So it's going to calculate the temperature just like we saw before in both Celsius and Fahrenheit. But now we're going to use a replace function. And that replace function is going to see if any of those labels ends up as -0. If it is, just replace it with 0. Okay, so that's a simple replace to be able to address that -0 situation. Okay, let's talk a bit about that text. So we know that we can take the station name, we can use the proper function to be able to make it mixed case. But again, that mixed case didn't work in Bakehomo's case because of that dash. That dash interprets it as another character. It doesn't separate it as two words. So it doesn't capitalize the C in Bakehomo. So I need to fix this. And in this case, I'm going to use an if statement. Very similar to an IF statement that we saw a bit earlier. But an if statement allows me to put multiple lines of logic within that condition. Okay. So it does the same find. It's going to look and see that find function if it finds any label that has a dash in it, like Bakehomo. If it does, then we're going to do a little bit of magic here. We're going to use a split function. The split function will allow me to take that string with that dash in it and separate it into two strings based on the dash. So it's going to separate Bakehomo as one word into Bay and Como. And it's going to store this split, the split function stores this value in an array. Remember what an array is. An array is a collection of objects. In this case, it will be a collection of two strings. So what can I do with that array? Well, the advantage of arrays is that you can then access individual items in the array based on an index number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that first value of the array, and that first value is indicated by index number 0. So all index numbers are 0 based. So to get to the first item, I'm going to get index number 0 of that array, which is in our case, Bay. And I'm going to do the same thing here. In this case, I'm going to make it uppercase, and I'm going to take the second value of that array, which is Como. So now we got Bay with a big B, we got Como with a big C. And then we're going to re-add the dash in between to give us a complete string. Of course, if it doesn't have any dash, then just give me whatever the field value is. So with that logic going on here, and of course this is all stored in an else statement. Don't forget the curly braces around the if and around the else. So once you have all this set up, you'll now perform that logic. So you'll be able to see now that Bakehomo has a big C, Mount Jolie has a big J, as it should. So there you have it, kind of a slow jam of this labeling profile demo. And there you have it, our walkthrough through the labeling profile. Hope you got something out of it. If you are interested in this topic, we do have an ArcGIS online group. So you can check out the URL at the bottom, and we have extra resources if you want to see the source code. There's a bunch of content we're going to throw up there, some story maps, so please check that out. And until next time, bye.